I was covered in grease, sweat dripping down my neck as I tightened the last bolt under the hood of an old truck. The sun was merciless, beating down on my back, but I didn't have the luxury of complaining. Being a broke mechanic in a rundown garage meant taking whatever jobs came my way, no matter how exhausting. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from my bank. Balance, $7.43. A bitter chuckle escaped my lips. Just enough for cheap coffee, if I skipped lunch. I was about to close up when I heard a commotion outside. A sleek black luxury car, a model I had only seen in magazines, was stalled on the side of the road, hazard lights blinking. The hood was open, steam rising from the engine. A woman stood next to it, looking completely out of place in the middle of nowhere. She wasn't just beautiful. She had this aura of confidence, even as she scowled at her phone. Expensive dress, designer heels, flawless posture. Definitely not from around here. She was trying to call someone, but judging from her frustrated expression, she wasn't having much luck. I wiped my hands on a rag and approached. Need help? Her sharp green eyes flicked to me, suspicion flashing across her face. You're a mechanic? I nodded. Been fixing cars since I was a kid. Looks like your engine's overheated. Mind if I take a look? She hesitated. I could see the internal battle. Trust a stranger, or wait for roadside assistance that might take hours. Finally, she sighed. Fine, but if you break anything, I swear I'll. I smirked. Relax. I don't charge unless I fix it. She crossed her arms, watching as I leaned under the hood. The second I touched the engine, I knew she had a serious problem. You got a leak. Your radiator's shot. She groaned. Of course it is. I straightened. I can tow it to my shop. Won't cost much. Her lips pressed into a thin line. How much? I scratched the back of my head. Depends. Could be a couple hundred. Her jaw tightened. That's nothing. I raised a brow. She really didn't look like someone who'd care about a few $100. She exhaled sharply. Fine. Just get fixed. Something about the way she said it made me pause. There was tension behind her voice. Not just irritation, something deeper. But I didn't push. I hooked her car to my rusty old tow truck, fully aware of how ridiculous the contrast looked. $1 million car being dragged by something that belonged in a scrapyard. She climbed into the passenger seat, arms crossed. As we drove, I stole a glance at her. You got a name? She hesitated, then muttered, Natalie. I nodded. I'm Jake. She didn't respond. I could tell she wasn't in the mood for small talk. But something about her told me this wasn't just a rich girl with car trouble. Something else was going on. And I had no idea that fixing her car would change my entire life. I pulled into my shop, if you could even call it that. A small, dingy garage with peeling paint and tools scattered everywhere. Natalie wrinkled her nose. This is where you work. I grinned. Yeah, it's not a 5-star repair shop, but it gets the job done. She hesitated before stepping out, arms wrapped around herself like she was shielding herself from the air itself. I popped the hood again, rolling up my sleeves. You can wait inside if you want. There's a couch. It's somewhat clean. She gave me a look like I had just offered her a seat on a dumpster. I'll stay here. Suit yourself. I gotta work, focusing on the damage. The radiator was completely shot. No quick fixes here. You're gonna need a replacement, I muttered. She groaned. How long? I sighed. Few hours, maybe overnight. Natalie let out an exasperated sigh and ran a hand through her hair. Of course. Just my luck. Something was definitely bothering her. You in a hurry? I asked casually. She hesitated. Then, to my surprise, she sat on the edge of the workbench, legs crossed. Not really. Just bad timing. I glanced at her, waiting for her to elaborate. She didn't. Instead, she looked around. You own this place? I laughed dryly. More like it owns me. Barely making ends meet. She tilted her head, studying me. Why do you do it then? I shrugged. It's what I'm good at, and it keeps me busy. Her gaze lingered on me for a second longer than necessary before she looked away. I kept working, but I could feel her watching me. Something told me Natalie wasn't the kind of person who spent time in places like this. And yet, she didn't seem eager to leave. And I was starting to wonder why. A few hours later, I had the radiator replaced. All set, I said, wiping the sweat from my forehead. Natalie stood, stretching. Finally, she reached into her purse and pulled out a wad of cash. Here. I frowned. I told you, it's a couple hundred. She smirked. I know. She handed me $500. My eyes widened. This is too much. She raised a brow. Consider a tip. I hesitated, but she shoved it into my hands. Then, just as she was about to leave, her phone rang. She answered. What do you mean the stock drop? I stilled. Stock. Her jaw tightened. I told him not to make that deal. No, I don't care what the board says. The pieces clicked. Natalie wasn't just some rich woman with an expensive car. She was somebody, and I had no idea what I just got myself into. Natalie ended the call with a sharp sigh, her fingers tightening around her phone. I stood there, my mind racing. Stock? Board meetings? What exactly had I stepped into? She turned and caught me staring. Her sharp green eyes narrowed. What? I hesitated. Nothing. Just sounds like a big deal. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. It's not. I raised an eyebrow. That didn't sound like not a big deal. Her lips pressed together, but then, almost as if she was too exhausted to keep up the act, she sighed. I run a company. A car company. I blinked. Like a dealership? She scoffed. No. Like the biggest car manufacturer in the country. My heart stuttered. I glanced at the sleek, high-end vehicle she had been driving, the way she carried herself, the ridiculous amount of cash she had just handed me. It all made sense now. You're kidding. She crossed her arms. Do I look like I'm kidding? I let out a low whistle. Damn. And here I thought you were just some rich girl with a fancy ride. She smirked. I am. Just richer. For a moment, we just stood there. The weight of what she'd said settled between us. Then she shook her head. I shouldn't have told you that. I shrugged. Too late now. Her gaze softened. You won't tell anyone, will you? I snorted. Who the hell am I going to tell? The only people I talked to are a bunch of grease-covered mechanics who wouldn't believe me anyway. That made her chuckle. A real, genuine laugh that I hadn't heard from her yet. It was the first crack in the armor she had been wearing. And for some reason, I liked seeing it. Natalie seemed less guarded after that. She hung around the garage for a while, even though her car was fixed. She watched as I worked on another beat-up truck, occasionally asking questions. Why do you still work here if you're struggling? She asked at one point, sitting on my workbench. I wiped my hands on my jeans. Because this is all I know. She tilted her head. You're good at it. I smirked. You don't know that. Your car could fall apart the second you leave. She laughed again. Fair point. Then, out of nowhere, she said, you should work for me. I froze. What? She shrugged. You know your stuff. I could use someone like you in my company. I let out a dry laugh. Yeah, sure. Let me just pack up my broke-ass garage and waltz into some high-rise office. I'm serious. I looked at her, and I realized she was. I swallowed. Why would you offer that? Natalie's expression turned thoughtful. Because I see something in you. And I trust my instincts. For the first time in a long time, I felt something stir in my chest. Hope. That night, I lay awake in my tiny, run-down apartment, staring at the ceiling. Natalie's words replayed in my head. You should work for me. She had given me her car before she left, told me to think about it. I wanted to laugh. What the hell was I supposed to do? Just leave my whole life behind and take a job with some billionaire CEO? I was a mechanic, not some corporate suit. And yet, the thought wouldn't leave me alone. Because deep down, I knew that if I stayed here, I'd never get anywhere. So, with a deep breath, I grabbed my phone and sent her a message. I'm in. And just like that, my world shifted. The next morning, Natalie's driver picked me up in a sleek black car. I felt like a damn fraud stepping into her corporate building. Sleek glass walls, towering ceilings, people in expensive suits walking around like they owned the world. And there I was in my worn-out jeans and an old leather jacket. I was painfully aware of the stares. Natalie met me in the lobby, smirking. You look uncomfortable. No shit. She chuckled. Come on. I followed her up to the executive floor, where she led me to a massive office overlooking the city. This is where it all happens, she said. The decisions, the deals, the future of the company. I shoved my hands in my pockets. And what do you need me for? She turned to me, her expression unreadable. Because I trust people who actually know cars, not just the ones who sell them. I raised an eyebrow. You trust me? She smiled. I do. For some reason, that meant more to me than I expected. And just like that, I became part of something I never imagined. But I had no idea that stepping into her world meant stepping into war. It didn't take long for me to realize that Natalie wasn't just running a company. She was fighting for it. She was young, brilliant, but the board members? They hated her. They saw her as an outsider, someone who didn't deserve to be in charge. And when they saw me by her side, they made it very clear they didn't approve. Who the hell is he? One of the older men sneered in a meeting. Natalie didn't even blink. He's my new consultant. A scoff. A grease monkey? Really? I clenched my jaw, ready to say something, but Natalie beat me to it. You can leave, she said coldly. The man's face went red. Excuse me. If you have a problem with my decisions, you're free to step down. Silence. I smirked. Damn. Natalie wasn't just smart. She was ruthless. But I knew it wasn't over. Because power like hers, it came with enemies. And I was about to find out just how dangerous they could be. I had barely been working with Natalie for 2 weeks when I realized just how deep the corruption in her company ran. The first red flag? The shipment logs. One night, after everyone had gone home, I was walking through the warehouse when I noticed a row of brand new engines. I wasn't an expert in luxury manufacturing, but I knew my engines. These weren't the high-performance models the company was famous for. They were cheap knockoffs. Frowning, I pulled out my phone and took a few pictures. Something wasn't right. I marched straight to Natalie's office the next morning, where she was drowning in paperwork. She looked up, exhausted. You're up early. I dropped my phone on her desk. We have a problem. She picked it up, scrolling through the pictures. Her face darkened. Where did you find these? Warehouse. These engines are trash. Not someone swapping the real ones out for these cheap pieces of junk. She cursed under her breath and leaned back in her chair. This doesn't make sense. I approved a high-end production budget. These shouldn't even be in our inventory. I crossed my arms. Then someone's messing with your supply chain, cutting costs, pocketing the difference. She exhaled, rubbing her temples. If this gets out, it could ruin everything. I clenched my jaw. So what do we do? She didn't even hesitate. We find out who's behind this, and we bury them. This wasn't just about bad parts. This was sabotage, and whoever was behind it had no idea who they were messing with. Natalie and I started digging. We pulled up order histories, supplier contacts, anything that smelled even a little suspicious. It didn't take long to find the discrepancies. Massive shipments of high-quality parts had been paid for, but the products being delivered were third-rate garbage. Someone was intercepting the orders and swapping them. But who? There's only one way to find out, I said. We set a trap. Natalie raised an eyebrow. Go on. I leaned forward. We place an order. One that's too valuable to mess with. Something whoever's doing this won't be able to resist. Her lips curled into a smirk. You want to bait them? Exactly. She tapped her nails on the desk. You realize this could get ugly, right? I nodded. I can handle ugly. She studied me for a moment, then picked up her phone. All right, Jake. Let's catch ourselves a traitor. The bait was set. A massive order of premium engines, flagged for one of the company's biggest projects. If someone was stealing, they wouldn't be able to resist this one. We tracked the shipment carefully, monitoring every step of its journey. And then it happened. The shipment arrived, missing half the inventory. Natalie and I went straight to the warehouse, where the floor manager, a guy named Harris, stood waiting. He looked pale. I don't know what happened, he stammered. I narrowed my eyes. You checked the trucks when they arrived? He swallowed. Yeah, but... Natalie cut him off. Harris, don't lie to me. His face crumbled. That's when I knew. It was him. Who are you working for? Natalie demanded. Harris looked desperate. It's not what you think. I stepped forward. Oh, I think it's exactly what we think. Sweat dripped down his forehead. Look, I didn't have a choice, okay? They paid me off. Said if I kept quiet, no one would get hurt. Natalie's voice was ice. Who? Paid. You. He hesitated. I grabbed his collar. Start talking. Now. He flinched. It was... Before he could finish, a loud bang echoed through the warehouse. The lights went out, and that's when everything went to hell. The warehouse plunged into darkness. I barely had time to react before I heard the sound of footsteps. Fast. Purposeful. Then, a sharp crack. Harris screamed. I lunged toward the sound, but something, or someone, slammed into me from behind. I hit the ground hard, pain shooting through my ribs. Natalie's voice rang out. Jake. I pushed myself up just in time to see 3 men in dark clothing rushing toward the exit. They were getting away. Harris was curled up on the ground, groaning in pain. I made a split-second decision. I chased them. I bolted after them, dodging through the maze of stacked crates. One of them turned back and threw a punch, but I ducked and slammed my fist into his gut. He crumpled. The second guy shoved past me, but Natalie, out of nowhere, swung a metal rod and took him down. That left the last guy. He was almost at the exit. I sprinted, reaching him just as he yanked the door open. I grabbed his jacket and slammed him into the wall. He struggled, but I pressed my arm against his throat. "Who sent you?" His breath was ragged. "You are too late." My blood turned to ice. "What the hell does that mean?" He grinned. And then, boom. An explosion rocked the warehouse. Fire erupted from the storage area, metal shelves collapsing in a chain reaction. Natalie screamed. And just like that, everything we had built was burning down. The fire department arrived too late. The warehouse, the shipment, all of it was gone. Natalie stood among the wreckage, her hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just about stolen parts anymore. This was war. I placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll find them." She turned to me, fire in her eyes. "No," she said coldly. "We won't find them. We'll destroy them." The warehouse lay in ruins, smoke still curling into the night sky. The fire department had done their job, but the damage was already done. Natalie stood at the edge of the wreckage, fists clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. Her empire had just been attacked. I walked up beside her, my ribs aching from the fight. We both know this wasn't random. She exhaled sharply. Of course it wasn't. Someone wanted to send a message. I glanced at the smoldering ruins. "Well, message received." She turned to me, her green eyes burning with something dangerous. "Then let's send one back." We spent the next few days digging. Hard. Harris, the warehouse manager, was missing. Vanished the night of the fire. The guy had tackled during the attack, lawyered up before we could even get to him. This was deeper than a few crooked employees. Natalie sat at her desk, scrolling through files. "I need to call an emergency board meeting." I leaned against the doorframe. "You think it's one of them?" Her jaw tightened. "I think it's all of them." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She rubbed her temples. "The board members. They never wanted me in charge. They've been waiting for me to slip up, but I haven't. So now, they're making me fail." I let out a slow breath. "So they're cutting corners, making bad deals, replacing parts with cheap knockoffs, and now they've gone as far as burning down your warehouse." She nodded. "And if I don't do something soon, they'll force me out completely." I sat down across from her. "Then we don't wait for them to make another move. We hit first." Her lips curled into a smirk. "Jake, I think I like the way you think. If the board wanted to play dirty, we play filthy." Natalie and I worked in secret, reaching out to contacts she still trusted, which at this point weren't many. We started tracking every order, every shipment, every financial transaction that didn't add up. And then we found it. A secret off-the-books account. Millions of dollars, company money, being funneled into an unknown source. Natalie stared at the screen, eyes wide. This is embezzlement." I grinned. "Which means we finally have them." She turned to me, her expression unreadable. "This could get dangerous, Jake." I leaned in, voice low. "Then let's make it deadly." Natalie called for an emergency board meeting. The men who had tried to sabotage her walked in, arrogant as ever. They thought they had won. They had no idea what was coming. Natalie sat at the head of the table, calm and composed. I stood behind her, arms crossed. The board's chairman, an older man named Prescott, smirked. "Natalie, if this is about the warehouse fire, I assure you." She slid a thick folder across the table. Prescott frowned, flipping it open. His face drained of color. Inside were pages of financial records. Transactions. Proof that millions of dollars had been stolen from the company. And at the bottom, his name. Natalie's voice was cold. "Would you like to explain, Prescott?" The room fell into stunned silence. Prescott stammered. I don't know what this is." I cut in. "Oh, come on. We all know exactly what this is." I leaned in, lowering my voice. The end of the line. The other board members looked panicked, exchanging nervous glances. They weren't just caught. They were finished. Natalie leaned forward. "I already called the authorities. They're probably waiting outside right now." One of the men stood, his chair scraping loudly. "You have no proof that we—" Natalie smiled. "Oh, but I do." She reached under the table and pulled out a USB drive. Your calls, your emails, your deals. I have it all. The room exploded into chaos. Some of them started shouting. Others tried to reason with her. But Natalie? She simply stood, adjusting her blazer. Effective immediately, all of you are fired. Security will escort you out. Have fun explaining this to the authorities. Prescott lunged forward, rage contorting his face. You think you've won? You have no idea who you're messing with. I stepped in front of Natalie, my stance firm. She smirked. No, Prescott, you have no idea who I am. And just like that, the men who had tried to ruin her, her own board members, were dragged out of the company in disgrace. Natalie had won, or so we thought. With the board out of the way, things should have settled. But they didn't, because someone else was still pulling strings in the dark. It started with little things. A deal that was supposed to go through suddenly fell apart. A major investor pulled out, without explanation. Then, a message appeared in Natalie's inbox. You should have stayed quiet. My stomach twisted. Nat, this isn't over. She nodded, her expression unreadable. I know, and we both realized the same thing. The board wasn't a real enemy. There was someone bigger behind this. And we had just declared war. The real mastermind finally revealed himself. It was one of her own executives. A man who had been by her father's side for years. A man she had trusted. His name was Victor Langston, and he wanted her gone. We set up a meeting, one last confrontation. Victor sat across from Natalie, calm and composed. You're in over your head, Natalie. She smiled. Funny. I was just about to say the same to you. I leaned forward. You tried to ruin her. You burned down her warehouse. You stole from the company. And now you think you still have power. Victor chuckled. Power isn't something you have, Jake. It's something you take. Natalie's voice was ice. Then let me take yours. She slid a final document across the table. A full investigation. Arrest warrants. Testimonies from every traitor she had exposed. Victor's smile finally vanished. This is checkmate, she whispered. A month later, everything had changed. The corrupt leaders were gone. The company was rebuilt. And Natalie? She had finally cemented her place as the true leader. As for me, I wasn't just some broke mechanic anymore. Natalie made me her partner. We stood on top of the newly built factory, looking out over the skyline. She nudged me. So, still think you don't belong here? I smirked. I think I was always meant to be here. She smiled. And just like that, two people from completely different worlds had built something that could never be destroyed. Because it wasn't just about revenge. It was about redemption. And we had won.